Hello and welcome to SauceCon. My name is Melissa Boggs, and it is my pleasure to be here today with you talking about the truth about Agile. I want to start by telling you a story. So if you can picture this, the bell rings and 30 15-year-olds burst into the classroom. They make a beeline for their desks, joining the rest of their Scrum team. At each table group, they hang their team flag and they set up their learning canvas. There's a low hum in the room as each team begins their daily Scrum. The teacher is walking around the room, available for questions or impediments, but hasn't yet spoken a word besides greeting them as they arrive. There's no need. Their sprint backlog was established in sprint planning earlier in the week, and they have all they need to get to work. As they wrap up their synchronization, one student approaches the teacher. "Mr. Boggs," says the teenage Scrum Master, "Isaiah was out sick yesterday. We filled him in on what we did, but he needs that worksheet." Another team is having a heated but healthy debate about whether they should swarm on their current work in progress or split the team and bring in another item. The room is alive with learning, and shockingly, no one is on their phone. This is just another day in an Agile classroom. I have had the privilege of having a front seat into some of the most powerful and inspiring Agile work, as my husband is well into his 7th year of applying Agile principles in education. Allow me to introduce myself. I'm the VP of Business Agility at Sauce Labs now, but joining this company was a full circle moment for me. This is a picture of me over 10 years ago as I began my career in the Agile space as a QA manager at a medical equipment company. This company really embraced Agile principles even before they knew what they were. So it'd been a minute since I had been a tester. So when I joined Sauce Labs, I decided to revisit some of the message boards, the forums, the subreddits that I used to frequent. I was curious to see how my QA colleagues were experiencing the Agile movement that I had come to hold so dear. I literally searched Agile on some of these forums, and what I found was a bunch of questions about tools and processes. I saw frustrations about 2-week deadlines and annoyance with how constrained they felt. And this was curious to me, so I decided to dig deeper. This quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes says, "A mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions." When I read some of these forums and subsequently talked with testers, developers, engineers, designers, I began to wonder if many of you have yet to have a new experience when it comes to Agile. I began to fear that we've lost the plot on what Agile was intended to be and what it could make possible for us. In many instances, it seems that we've been asked to simply take a new set of tools, but apply it to the same way that we were working before. Have we just replaced project management tools with Agile project management tools, but barely changed our mental model at all? By the end of our time together today, I want to do 3 things. I want to challenge what you may have been told about Agile ways of working. I want to ignite your curiosity about how you might apply Agile values and principles. And I want to encourage you to embrace a new experience when it comes to agility. Now, I know this is not a pretty picture, but it's a really important picture to the origin story of the Agile movement. In 2001, in Snowbird, Utah, 17 individuals came together to form a coalition. I often compare the Agile Manifesto signatories to the Star Wars Rebel Alliance. Now, don't get me wrong. Contrary to popular belief, I don't actually believe that waterfall was the empire. Waterfall methods have their place in work that's predictable and known. No, that's not what these 17 individuals were rejecting. They're rejecting the notion that all work is the same and can be approached uniformly. The thing is, knowledge work or creative work is complex. It can't be approached the same way as a manufacturing line, although ironically, those were changing too around the same time. No, these 7 individuals came together because they were all approaching software development work a little differently. So in this picture, you see some of the leaders in Kanban, in Scrum, in extreme programming, in Lean. They all knew that somehow the work they were doing was revolutionary. And most importantly, they knew that together they would be better. They didn't all have to do the same thing. There was no effort for everyone to do Kanban, but rather, if they could put language around the values and the principles that they all held dear, they would be that much stronger in their rejection of the status quo. I often wonder if they had any idea how far that this would take them and us. Did they know that their words and their work would be impacting the 15-year-old at Denver North High School? Probably not. The outcome of their time together was the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Sometimes this is known as the 4 Agile values, and a set of 12 behaviors or principles that accompanied them. So quickly, let's walk through the manifesto. The first section says, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. This is just an intro, but I actually want to highlight something here. The Agile movement was not originated in a consulting firm by a bunch of executives who did not know how to do this work. It was originated by 17 developers who had been doing this work and helping others do it. This is not an ivory tower philosophy. This is a grassroots movement. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. Now, I want to point something out. This last phrase often gets left off, and it's extremely important. That is, while there is value in the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. Now, there are a lot of times when I hear, oh, well, Agile means that you don't plan. And Agile means that you don't, have comprehensive documentation. That's not what they were saying at all. But what they were saying is, let's not sacrifice the human experience for documents, for sticking to a plan. Rather, let's elevate the human experience, and those things will become even better as a result. So this is a lengthy quote. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but what I want to focus on is the first and the last sentences. At the time, in 2001, these manifesto signers seemed a little bit crazy. It was a little hard to imagine software that didn't take years to develop, test, and release. But this wasn't about project management for them. It was about the ability of development teams and the organizations that they served to be able to pivot. And frankly, it's hard to pivot when you are 27% through a 5-year project plan with no way to evaluate the value of what you're building. But as the last sentence says, the crazy ones are the ones who change the world. And that is exactly what they did. This graph depicts the use of the word Agile in a couple different forms over the course of 200 years. You can see exactly when the manifesto signers made their mark. There's an exponential incline in the use of the word right after they wrote the manifesto. They not only impacted software development, but language too, and how we think about our organizations. And they were just in time. This chart depicts the pace of adoption for specific things in our culture from the use of transportation all the way to YouTube, showing how quickly certain things caught on. This curve has a strikingly similar appearance to the adoption of the word Agile, because they saw something back in 2001. They recognized that we were going to have to change the way we work in order to keep up with how rapidly the world was changing. The introduction of the internet obviously changed everything about the way that ideas spread. But when ideas spread, software and really entire organizations have to be able to keep up with it. So these are two definitions of the word Agile straight from the Oxford Dictionary. When I looked this up, it was striking to me because frankly, a lot of us have been led to believe that the first definition of Agile is what matters. But really, at the end of the day, the second definition is what makes a difference. And this is where I begin to worry that we've lost the plot or somehow we're doing it wrong. And I know that's a controversial thing to say, oh, you're doing it wrong. But when I say that, I mean, if we're not focusing on number two, and everything in number one is impeding your ability to be number two, then we may need to rethink how we're approaching agility. The ability to move quickly and easily in the world that we just described, where adoption is insanely fast, the pace of change is insanely fast, we have to be able to move quickly and easily. And if your division of tasks or your 2-week deadlines are in the way of that, rather than supporting that, then we have to think differently. Here's another way to look at those same two definitions. Many of you may have been taught that Agile means story points, sprints, Kanban, refinement, test-driven development. All of those practices are extremely useful. I'm not saying that we should abandon them. However, they're only useful if they're helping us to deliver high quality value on a regular basis and continuing to get better at it. If we don't understand the value or like why we're doing our practices, then they could possibly get in the way of our principles. The thing is, becoming more agile is not an easy proposition. It demands a lot of us. But in return, it gives us the power to take control of, and shape our future. The world is changing constantly. That change accelerates every day and with every technological advance. It's not enough to be adaptable. You see, adaptable is reactive. The power of agility is in its proactivity. It's building our organizations, our teams, our classrooms, our leadership in such a way that it embraces change as an opportunity to flourish. Like the hummingbird, with its perfectly designed bones and muscle structure, we create the right structure and mindset necessary to listen closely and to move quickly. Because if you don't place principles first, this is what you end up with: methodology madness. Instead of talking about continuous improvement and customer value, we end up stuck in a conversation about Scrum versus Six Sigma or lean versus extreme programming. Yet, if we're focused on principles, we can actually take elements from most of this to actually help us be agile and not just do agile. So for the next several slides, I want to actually walk you through the 12 principles that came from Snowbird, Utah in 2001. It's amazing that for the most part, they still really apply today. And in fact, they probably apply more. So let's walk through them one at a time. And I'm going to highlight some keywords for you and talk to you a little bit about what they mean. So principle 1, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, I will note, It has been proven that all of these principles can be applied outside of software as well. Told you the story about applying these principles in the classroom. They've also been applied in marketing. They've been applied in sales. So when you see software, you can also think about just value. So in this case, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of value. So the keywords here are customer and value. We must center ourselves on the needs of the collective customer, not one specific customer at any given time necessarily, but the collective customer. Because if we're delivering things that are not valuable to them, then what are we even here for? If you are not focused on delivering customer value, then you may not have renewals of your product, or people won't buy more products from you, or they'll discontinue using the product that you have. And there is nothing more frustrating than working really, really hard on something to have no one use it at all. The other piece of this that's really interesting is the early piece. And we're going to talk a little bit more about risk reduction as we go on. So I'll plant a little seed and we'll come back to the idea of early and risk reduction. Principle number 2, welcome changing requirements even late in development. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. So a couple of the keywords here are change, and we're seeing customer again. Very, very focused on being customer-centric in these principles. This principle really challenges the notion of long project plans with unchanging requirements. Now, keeping in mind back in 2001, that was really, really common at the time. I remember project plans that took us, 9 to 10 months to develop the requirements. Then they would be handed to development, who took another, 2 years to develop the software, given to QA for another 6 months. And the idea that something could change in there was a little bit terrifying, because if something changed in the development cycle, did you have to go back and reevaluate all over again? So how do we build our process in such a way that we can welcome those changes, that it doesn't set us back 2 years? Principle 3, deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months, with preference to the shorter time scale. This is about risk reduction. This is not about setting deadlines and holding people, to the fire, but it's about delivering incremental value that customers can give us feedback on, so that we know that we're continuing in the right direction, and it reduces the risk that we're building something that nobody wants. So this one is about delivering value and reducing risk by delivering that value frequently. Agile principle number 4. Business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This was an insane idea at the time. If you think again about the handoffs, the customer support team might have given the business analysts, some idea or some problem that needed to be solved. They would spend a lot of time with it and then hand it off. And the business folks may not have heard anything for 6 months. And there was this delineation between the business and software development. And the 17 people in this particular development of manifestos said, that's not okay. We need to be talking every day. We need to be showing you what we're doing, getting feedback, and making sure that we're all on the same page to go in the right direction. It also creates a synergy between the business and development that helps us in future situations. It helps the business people to have empathy for the developers and vice versa. One team, reduce handoffs. Principle 5, build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and the support they need, and trust them to get the job done. The two things that stand out for me here are bi-directional trust. So first, we're saying essentially to leadership, you need to trust the people on the team. But to the people on the team, we're saying you also need to trust that leadership is going to give you the environment and the support. And leadership needs to live up to that. But when we do that, we actually give the work to the people closest to the problem. And when we give the work to the people closest to the problem, we're going to come up with innovative and new solutions that maybe couldn't have been developed further away from the customer or from the problem. There's also a little bit of a hidden plug here for stable teams. So when they say build the projects around motivated individuals, they're saying put together a team, allow that team to become stable and motivated, and then bring the work to them. So that's a little hidden plug for stable teams. Principle 6, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. That one's kind of interesting given the state of the world, right? So they were plugging for co-location at the time. They were saying, we need to be together. But there were reasons for that. And we lacked the tools that we have now to make other types of conversation better. What they were really referring to was handoffs. They were referring to just putting a requirement into, whatever your tool is and expecting the development team to just read it, rather than having a real conversation about the customer need. So co-location is important, but we do have tools now. I mean, the whole world has seen in the last year and a half that it is possible to work remotely and have really healthy teams. I think the important thing here is not relying on tools to have conversation for you. A lot can get lost, in the ether or in the electronics between you and someone else. So they're talking about human contact here. Principle 7, working software is the primary measure of progress. So what they're talking about here is incremental working software. Remember, like preference to the shorter time scale. So they're talking about not building the wheel and then the axle and then the shell of the car, but rather a skateboard or a scooter. There's a graphic out in the world that kind of shows the idea of incremental building versus just iterative. And so one of the things they're saying is build incrementally so that with that preference to shorter time scale, you're actually handing the customer something of value. And then the other thing they're talking about here is metrics. Measuring the number of hours, the number of story points completed means nothing if you don't have working software. So there is an implication here to be very careful about what you measure, because if what you measure is not in service to working software or working value, then it really doesn't mean anything. Principle 8, Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. If any of you have encountered me out in the world prior to SauceCon, you know that this is my pet principle. Exhaustion is not a status symbol. Agile is not an excuse for placing human beings on hamster wheels and making them work themselves to death. This principle is incredibly important as to how we approach Agile work. You need to actually understand what sustainable means for your team, for your sponsors, and for your users. You have to be able to understand if your users can absorb change. And if they can't, you help them do that. You figure out what the right pace is. But I have too often seen Agile, but specifically Scrum, used as an excuse to just grind people into the ground. And I deeply reject that notion. The Agile principles from day one said, don't do that. So figure out what sustainable pace is. Understand what the implicit and explicit policies are that are encouraging people to overwork and burn out. Because the fact is, there's brain science that proves that people need breaks. In order to be our most creative, our most agile, we have to be able to recharge. And the manifesto signers saw that way back when. Principle 9, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. This is about quality, which should be something really important to all of us at this particular conference. Do not allow people to use Agile as an excuse to cut corners. The Agile principles say technical excellence, good design. So people also often ask me, how do we handle technical debt? How do we handle design? And my answer is, we handle it inside the team. It's part of the team, and it's an assumption. It shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be, how do we fit this in? It should be, if we're going to have working software, we have to address our technical debt. If customers are going to want to use our software, we have to have a good design. And so I also reject the notion that we should be moving so fast that those things are an afterthought, because then we don't end up meeting some of the other principles that we believe in. Principle 10, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, is essential. So this is ruthless prioritization. Simple code, clean code, and being so clear on the customer need that that's what we do. Now, I want to point out an interesting tie between Principle 9 about technical excellence and Principle 10. We have to ruthlessly prioritize if we are going to make technical excellence a priority. So we may have to do less, stop starting, and do fewer things in order to be technically excellent. And so this principle kind of gives permission to the one before. Be very clear about what is necessary and make it really, really great. Make it excellent. Principle 11. The best architectures, requirements, and decisions emerge from self-organizing teams. Now, I want to say something about this. Self-organization is not easy. We actually have to work harder to collaborate in self-organizing teams. And I found often that if organizations are traditionally very hierarchical, then there's a lot of decision-making skill that self-organizing teams have to learn. They have to work harder and find the data necessary to make the right decisions. But as experts in your craft, whether it be development or testing or design, I will always advocate for pushing decisions like this closest to the work. Principle 12. At regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. This one is inspect and adapt. So here's the interesting thing. Postmortems have been around for a really long time. But I think what the signers are saying here is that postmortems were taking too long. If you were in a 2-year project and you did a postmortem a month after the project ended, how does that help you inspect and adapt along the way? How did that make the project better? It's too late when you're doing a postmortem. So what they're saying in Principle 12 is find ways to build it in. You don't have to be doing sprints to do a retrospective, but you can find an interval at which you're going to stop and speak together as a team about how you're working. Now, I don't want this to be confused with how your product is doing, although that's important too. This is actually, how are you doing as a team? How are you communicating? How are you collaborating? How are you engaged? And what are the things that we can do to help us be more joyful, more engaged, more effective as a team? So those are the 12 principles. Here's what strikes me about most of them, if not all. People first. It goes back to the first Agile value, which said individuals and interactions over processes and tools. And if agility is about people first, it's only because business should be about people first. Here's why. Agility is a business proposition. While Agile organizations strive to be engaging places to work that put the humans first, it's an incredibly strong contributor to the bottom line. Frequent feedback loops reduce risk. When we put our working product in front of our customers and ask for their feedback, we reduce the risk that we will invest money into something they just don't want. Also, inviting our customers to assist us in inspecting our product gives them a seat at the table. It doesn't just elicit their feedback, but it also gains their emotional investment in where we're going. They become our champions. A culture of transparency invites team members to ask for help before it's too late or too expensive to fix a problem. And it's an Agile value to create safe to fail workplaces. But in addition, our concept of incremental development, minimum viable product, sets us up to fail in a very small and low impact way. That doesn't just reduce risk for the product, but honestly, it creates a psychological safety. It makes it okay to try things and to experiment. Because when safe experimentation exists, it paves the way for us to discover new and innovative ways to solve problems. And if you think about all the things I just listed, none of these are IT specific. While it may have started there, it doesn't end there. And frankly, it can't end there. The need for resilience and adaptability extends to all areas of our organization. We have seen time and time again that it's not adequate for IT teams to just work in sprints and have a daily Scrum and call it a day. For true agility to exist, it must connect the entire organization in a rhythm and a cadence in service to the customer. So I ask myself, I ask you, are we optimizing for individuals and interactions over processes and tools? Are we putting people first? Are we leaning into that business proposition? Now, putting people first isn't easy. That's why there's 12 principles and not 2. But there is power in it. The power of the Agile mindset is deep and wide. It's in the big things, like organizational structure, software architecture, but it's also in the small things, like approaching a problem with curiosity instead of jumping to a solution. It's poetic and soulful, encouraging us to bring our whole selves to work. It's disciplined, requiring us to reject our old habits and avoid making excuses. It's compassionate and empathetic, commanding us to value our customers and our team members above all else. And it's agnostic, a set of values that transcend software and bring order to complexity in all areas of humanity, if we let it. Ed Catmull had it perfectly right here. He says, figuring out how to build a sustainable creative culture, one that doesn't just pay lip service to the importance of things like honesty, excellence, communication, originality, self-assessment, but really committed to them, no matter how uncomfortable that became, wasn't a singular assignment. It was a day in, day out, full-time job. The pursuit of an agile environment, which is essentially what he says here, without using the words, is a full-time job. It requires consistency and persistence, but it's worth it. So here's the moment that you've been waiting for, the truth. The truth about Agile is that it is simply 4 values and 12 principles. The irony is that the values and principles should be the least controversial thing about the Agile experience. They are the hardest part, though. It is so much easier to focus on practices. We fall back to what's comfortable. We know how to put things into a management tool and how to sit with people and hold them to it. But the manifesto signers didn't set out to make us comfortable. They set out to change the way that we work for our benefit, for our organizations and our customers. And the truth is that practices without principles are ineffective at best, and they're damaging at worst. It hurts my heart sometimes to hear how many people have had such a terrible experience with Agile, but what they describe is simply command and control disguised with this new name. But it's not the Agile that I know. There's a lot of power in following these principles. But what remains to be seen is how we'll harness that power. Will we simply go through the motions of Scrum, allowing it to become just another project management method? Will we say that we're doing Kanban? Or will we embrace the principles, the soul of agility, and use the power to make our world a better place? I know that sounds really woo-woo and very aspirational, but the fact is, I am buoyed by the stories of Scrum in our classrooms, of Agile principles in our classrooms, because there we actually see true agility in action. As these kids learn algebra or read literature, they're also learning life and leadership skills. They're working together toward a common goal. They're leveraging the strength of their team. They're encouraged to ask for help and learn from the risks they take while celebrating their successes. They constantly inspect and adapt their work in an Agile classroom, learning to accept change as a way of life. I don't know about you, but I didn't learn these things in school. And in fact, in some ways, I learned the opposite. And I've been spending most of my career trying to unlearn these things. So they're learning these skills right alongside us. And my hope is that the world that they arrive in after high school or college is one that actually matches what they learned in class. They'll grow up with many of the skills we didn't, and they won't have to unlearn bad habits of command and control and obfuscation and death by metrics. In these upcoming leaders, I see the power of agility to transform us. And in these upcoming leaders, I see hope. Thank you.